When we've done these over in the UK, it started with a sort of similar sort of group, and we've got built it up to 300 people. We landed here a few years ago in the US with our day job, which is obviously as a recruitment business. We've always tried to sort of build communities and put good people together, which is very fundamental to what I think we should do as a company. Find a way of getting good people who've got good insights and put them together and create opportunities for people to learn, to share, to network, to meet, to connect, and hopefully do business with each other. Our audience has always been vendors, hedge funds, end users, consultancies, everyone in between, and we've always sat there in the middle, service providers, we've always sat there in the middle and thought there's a great way of us helping to introduce good people to good people. And that's been my sort of founding philosophy for the last 20 odd years since I've been in this industry, that good people know good people, and that's where we want to go as a company. So I'm delighted you're all here today. We're going to start off with a panel discussion, looking at data as the new oil, as the catchy headline talks about. But we also want to see how ready people's engines are for that and how we can make sure that everyone's sat there and utilising something, because my belief has always been that this sector, the financial services sector, has got a golden opportunity with data. But at the same sort of time, we've got this situation where there's other industries who I think have gone so far ahead of the curve and are leading the pack. And that represents opportunities, and there's natural obstacles within the financial services sector we're going to come up with a little bit later on. But these guys are going to talk far more eloquent than I about the whole thing. We've got a panel of absolute experts, wonderful people. I've had a great time with them talking about this beforehand. They're going to wow you with and blind you with science, but also put some great insight in there before. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Kevin, Kartik, and Kate. And they're going to give us a little bit of an introduction now to it. I should have introduced myself. I'm Toby, by the way, Toby Babb of Harrington Starr. So let's pass you over to Kevin, kick us off, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. How could we go wrong with that big intro? But anyway, my name's Kevin Sweeney. I work for Fidelity. I drive product strategy within the applied technology firm. Prior to that, I worked with a few of you guys at Global Markets and various banks, exchanges, and startups. And why I guess I'm on the panel is all of those have really revolved around data. So I'm excited to be it.
Awesome. First of all, Toby, thank you for having us.
Absolute pleasure.
And thanks for everyone for also joining us. I don't know if the mic is okay, but I'll just speak out loud as well. I spent a few years out of college, worked as a U.S. diplomat and a CIA officer, and then ended up starting a company, Devron, just a few years ago. And we'll kind of discuss a little bit more about what Devron does, but our number one goal was to help organizations get access to personalized software for their customers, because we were really realizing that a lot of organizations just couldn't get access to enough data that was very sensitive when it comes to how do you understand your customer's behavior. And so when I spun out of the CIA, saw some problems, and then Devron was the solution, and I'm super excited to be here and just talk to you guys more about it.
For me, it doesn't get much cooler than the CIA afterwards. But Kate, you've got to follow that. So
Yeah, I'm Kate Chatzopoulos. Happy to be here. Thank you. I work at Symphony Communications, which is a collaboration platform built for financial services about 10 years ago. What I do there, I drive our operations initiative. So we have over 600,000 users on our platform across 1,000 financial institutions. And I help operations stakeholders really understand how they can leverage the platform in an efficient way and to interoperate with other platforms and just be more efficient and leverage their data in the right way.
So you see what I'm talking about? A pretty awesome panel there with people talking about some very cool stuff.
CIA was very special. You can't beat that. Come on.
Yeah, we'll be zapping you so no one can talk about this afterwards. I think from where we go. But we're going to break this up into sort of various parts of the conversation. I'd like this audience to be as interactive as possible. I know a fair few of you, and you've all got good voices and good thoughts in this sort of space. So please don't be shy and join the conversation wherever you choose within it as well. We'll run for about sort of 40, 45 minutes, and then sort of open it up to a bit of Q&A. We've got some pizzas for those who are hungry coming up a little bit later on, and please drink the bar dry and enjoy yourselves afterwards. So we're going to start with the opportunity. We'll move a little bit into the obstacles that sort of, I guess, block the way a little bit in the space. We'll see what we think we should get right to get the engines purring next year, and then we'll finish up with a little bit view to the future. So that's the order of play. So, Kate, let's start off with the opportunity and talk a little bit about the great data rush and why everyone who I've been speaking to all the way through this year has been talking data, data, data. Tell us a little bit about the scale of the opportunity in your eyes at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's so much data available to us. We were talking about it the other day. You were talking about, was it Costco or Tesco?
Tesco's in the UK.
Tesco, who has so much data on individuals, it actually knows like what it should be suggesting to you to purchase. So there's a lot of data flowing through our platform. Obviously, from a day-to-day basis, all of it's encrypted, so we actually don't see any of it. But with all of that data, also comes a lot of risk. Interest rate risk, we saw what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, market risk, Credit Suisse, messaging risk, which applies directly to Symphony in that financial institutions have been fined over $549 million for pushing data in and out of non-compliant tools like SMS, WeChat, WhatsApp. What are all of the tools? And it's caused a lot of tension in the marketplace. So from our perspective, what we see happening is many institutions are very focused on obviously monitoring their data and ensuring that it's being used in a compliant way. It's one of the reasons why Symphony was built. And really from our perspective, what we're doing is connecting people, but ultimately connecting them with purpose so that we protect, we connect, and we accelerate the movement of information from one place to the other across the marketplace. So we are a resilient, encrypted network that's connecting people and allowing them to do business across the front, middle, and back office. And really, when I speak to a lot of heads of operations. I speak to heads of innovation, digital transformation strategies. And what they're really trying to do is understand how they can leverage their data in the best way possible. From a Symphony perspective, we are not only supporting communication from connecting people, but we're also in the business of helping the industry identify who the right people are, because it's obviously very important. You shouldn't be passing information to the wrong place. And so being able to identify and then being able to collaborate through many different communication tools, whether it's just chat, simple chat, or voice. We're going to talk about voice and the telephone later on. And then being able to access all of the data that is flowing through the platform, not from a Symphony perspective, but from the users of the platform, and then making the most out of the data with business intelligence and so on. So it's a lot of focus there.
I think it's a fascinating sort of opportunity, and I speak to people all the time about sort of the needs of what businesses are looking for at the moment. And they talk a lot about removal of friction, they talk a lot about speed, they talk about cost reduction, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the point there about cost reduction is also saving. And when you talk about those sort of numbers in starting thing with the ever-increasing regulation around it, I think that sort of data is an answer that can dramatically improve that situation at the same sort of time.
Yeah, you really have to look at the history, right? So data's been around a long time, right? It's been around since business has started. What you see now over the last probably 5 years is you're using data to reduce error, right? That's really what so in the old days when you looked at Mad Men and all of the show, they had a lot of people gather around, they had some data points, and they took a guess. You're really, really reducing less and less and less and less, right? So now so there's two different phenomenons about that. The first thing is why it's so in vogue this year is because the tools to get that scraping or mining are cheaper, right? If you have the right person that speaks the language, you can understand it far better. So it's cheaper to mine this data.
And more advanced, right?
And what you're also seeing is you can almost get a good probability. You look at Netflix. I'm a big fan of Netflix. The odds of them getting the right movies for me are, in the beginning, was really, really low. It's almost perfect at this point. That's what they're starting to see. So you get all of these things. So you went from a situation where you had data, very, very small, took a guess at it, to now you're at a point where you can almost project what's going to happen in the future. And with these tools and the advancing of AI, it's becoming easier and easier and easier. So the only caveat to that is how much data is an economies of scale where you have too much, and then you start flooding. So I think this is the critical influx you'll see, and we'll get into this later in trends, but the next years ahead is when you have so much data, what can you actually discount? Because I think a lot of firms that we do business with, they're paralyzed until they have exact perfect data sets, which just don't exist anymore.
That analysis paralysis, I think, is
Exactly, analysis paralysis, sir.
Hey, so I'd ask, between what Kate said and what you said, how does string search play into it? Whereas, like, people who did this also did this. But when you get into the financial world, you can't do that. You can't say, oh, clients who traded IBM also trade Microsoft. You do that, I mean, everybody's in jail. So
Yes.
it's like, how do you get the information you need? Because, like, Netflix has a narrow number of things it's searching for in order to create that recommendation.
Yes.
But in the finance world, there's a million data points, and 99% of it is like isolated to one specific client. So how do you?
Yes.
So-
Okay, go ahead.
So
Yep.
I'll start from a communication perspective. So Symphony's end-to-end encrypted, so we don't see any messages that go through the platform, and that's very important for our clients, and one of the reasons why we were created.
But at any level, so there's no corporate level that can see.
Nothing,
people
absolutely
are
nothing.
talking about this.
Absolutely nothing. But what we do see is, and this is also at a very high level, we can see who you're connected with. So JP Morgan is a customer of ours, and we have buy-side, sell-side security services firms on our platform. What is really valuable to our sell-side organizations like JP Morgan or Citi is for them to understand not only who they're connecting with, so they know that these top buy-side organizations, their teams are speaking to on an external perspective, but we can also tell them who they're not speaking to, and that allows them. That allows them to go back and say, okay, are we being super efficient in our communication strategies because we're not speaking to these 10 buy-side firms via this secure and compliant collaboration platform?
There's some technologies in the privacy, data privacy ecosystem as well that have been used to solve the exact same problem that you mentioned, which is if I'm looking at a set of selectors that include, confidential and relevant business information about clients and their social security numbers or the PII, the old answer, about 10 to 20 years ago was, we just have to redact it, right? We can't do anything with that data, but when you redact all this information, you're losing vital signals of that data. Where if you wanted to cluster any set of your customers together and understand some trends and patterns, it's hard to now do that because you don't really understand who is inside that cluster. Well, if you fast forward to today, there's various levels of encryption techniques such as dynamic hashing, such as multi-party computation, which are being used to essentially say that Kartik is actually a number, and if you look at that number across the whole entire data set, it's not going to reveal any sort of sensitive information about that individual, but you can at least cluster information together, and actually we're helping financial institutions do that exact same thing so that they can again understand more about how to recommend specific credit card promotions to their customers, the next best product to their customers, without actually having a very detailed understanding of the customer's demographics, right?
Just say that to your specific. Prime brokers will now tell you the biggest trades that the hedge funds collectively as a group have, which stocks you're most shorted. DTCC came on with a bunch of data coming out of the back end from the board on types of equal binds. There's a lot of.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an ethical question you're asking, right? So it's absolutely ethical. What I see in the trends is aggregation of data, right? Every single firm, New York Stock Exchange, Amex, all the ones that you've identified, you can get sediment left and right. And even if you can't, right? Look, I have a pretty good background in this stuff. You can look at just the trades that are going on, and you can figure out that the ones that are executing onesies and twosies, guess what? That's retail flow. So you can pretty much reverse engineer exactly whatever you want. Ethically, whether or not you should or not is another debate. But to answer your question with the string and such, you can absolutely pretty much pull data around. And that's where I started my conversation. It depends. You have the tools now to do it. So now you need the safeguard and stuff like that. But I see really, really value in actually doing this stuff. So I give you an example. If somebody has a portfolio, right, and we'll talk retail, and they are on a stock that's been standard, like meaning that it's not rising above 10 ticks up, 10 ticks down. Why not tell them to write a call, right, and pick up premium? That's a logical strategy. Hedge funds have been doing it for years. And by the way, you hedge your portfolio. What's wrong with that, right? It's not enough, but yet you're still looking at that data. Same thing to the point of open interest, right? On options. You can easily look at open interest and see where people are buying and selling options, and you can reverse engineer on where the stock's going to go. So the power of the data, it's a question of where you point it right now. But what's so promising, and this is really equates back to when I started in the early 90s, you're seeing a democratization of the data. So in the old days, you had specialists on the floor and they could always price it up and they would beat up the little guy. Now the little guy can get the data. So I actually see this as a huge opportunity more than anything. Now, ethically, we have to balance it, and I think we'll get into that later. But you're seeing a really, really powerful thing that more and more people are understanding data. So I like this, it's just a question of where you point this huge amount of firepower, right? So I think it's going to really level the playing field.
And it does create that, exactly that.
Exactly.
It's a new world of opportunity.
And again, this is not an AI panel, I'm on that in a couple of weeks. But again, that's Boogeyman, and what's the thing from Terminator, the Sky, whatever that thing is in Terminator, we're going to build AI and it's going to destroy the world. Why would you think that? Like, if you have checks and balances, it should help out. Why would somebody just want to sit there over and over again? Press a button, you can automate that and so on and so forth. Technology is never something to be scared at.
Yeah.
And that's always what I built on. I mean, again, we're all technologists. That's what you got to live with, and that's the way you should approach this within ethical bounds.
Kartik, I want to bring you into the conversation about opportunity as well. So, what you're doing is extremely exciting thing. You're putting into a new area of the marketplace, et cetera, et cetera. When you look at data as a whole and you look at the industry, tell us where you think the opportunity lies.
Yeah, so the reason we started the company about 3.5 years ago was because when I was at the CIA, it was very difficult for us to share data, not only with other parts of the U.S. government or different foreign allies, but even U.S. companies that wanted to help us with our mission and get access to our data to give us our technology so that we can better understand and make insights and make decisions. The reason why I started Devron was it's very important to now enable banks, insurance companies to also do the same without them feeling like they have to give away their data or rights or access to their data or a copy of their data and all these different things that is required for a new software vendor to come into play and provide any sort of analysis for that institution. So where I see this now going is that there's a massive opportunity for large organizations to keep data inside of their own clouds, securely in their networks, and still leverage proprietary tools that are being built by Silicon Valley, that are being built by various different other software providers, and not have to breach any data rights or data laws, right? And it took us a long time to get here. And if you look very, very closely into how the American Data Privacy Act and some of the new laws that are coming out in America for how we want to deal with this data so we can better protect the consumer, the opportunity is becoming more and more prevalent because specific technologies are now enabling organizations to keep data in their cloud or on-prem, wherever the data needs to reside, and bring software to the data versus constantly having to take data, shift it out, manage the lineage, manage the governance, hire 10 more people to figure out how that data is going to move or not move, create more roles inside the CDO office. And a lot of those things are becoming more clear that let's focus a little bit more on the analytics and the tooling. And if you look at, for the past almost 6 quarters, if you look at in the venture capital community, what kind of companies are being invested into, they're not, focused on data engineering anymore. They're focused on analytics and machine learning. Because the data engineering problem says, again, for about 20 years, it was about let's consolidate data, let's move data around the right systems, versus now the data is in good enough systems. Let's focus more on activating it and actually generating insights from it.
It's very interesting because what I was thinking about in the previous conversation was from like a retail's perspective, there's so much data that's out there because nobody thinks to tick the box to say, don't love my data. But at an institutional level, most firms will say, if you present them with an agreement, you're a provider, and in part of your agreement it says, we're going to use your aggregated anonymous data for X, Y, Z, they're going to say, cut that out. I don't want my data used for anything. So on the one hand, that prevents a lot of useful data from being sort of contributed into the pool of anonymized aggregated data to present helpful analytics. But on the other hand, in some cases, they don't even have a choice. I mean, there's governance around their firms that just don't allow it. And then that gets back to also the fact that maybe 10, 15 years ago, all the proprietary software was maybe delivered on-prem, and everybody realized, well, we got to go into cloud. All the security sits. And only in the last few years, as a lot of larger institutions got comfortable with getting the cloud because of the scale of security.
Yeah, but to answer your question, you're absolutely right. The institutions, some do. Some of the ones up in Connecticut are hardcore. They don't allow it. Some do allow you. And the reason is cost. This all gets down to cost, right? So sometimes you have to give up data to get the benefits of the cost. So you can be one of the last people that keep it on a mainframe and keep it very siloed. That's your right, but then you're spending a fortune on it. So it's a very, very much a dichotomy, and this is where it's an ethical question. This is where your partners are critical, right? You have to trust your partners, you know. So not in our area, but more. I see this more and more in healthcare, which is an absolute nightmare. Sharing that data to me is egregious as it gets, right? There is no value in your doctor sending out your data to anywhere. In my opinion, that's not Fidelity, that's my opinion. I have to make sure I say that. But honestly, like, that to me is the most egregious. But for financial services, as long as you agree to it, there's huge benefit, you know?
But a lot of firms are not agreeing to it.
Agreed.
Maybe to your point, that's an opportunity to say,
But
well, here's an alternative.
The ironic thing about those and some of the larger firms that all of us work with, they actually do get the data. They aggregate it themselves because they're so large. And this is where it gets back to that democratization of this thing. Is like the large firms always had this data. So when I started out, like all these big specialist firms and all these firms always had the data. Now you're giving it to people at a cheaper scale. So now it's kind of equaling it out. So now they're like, oh, this is bad. You've been doing it for years anyway. So like, you know, that's really the dichotomy of all this stuff. And that's what makes it so interesting, you know, and how they respond to it. And what you're seeing is very large firms are actually starting to go into cloud and starting to realize, like, I can't just spend all this money on this stuff. To your point, the cost of staffing alone is astronomical. You know, and then really what are you getting at by keeping it to yourself?
This comes back to, I mean, it's a perfect segue in, isn't it, to the obstacle side of things, because we're talking there about costs. We're talking about an industry that's sort of been as resistant to things like cloud, which took a long time. It took a pandemic, as I often say, to really adopt it within the financial services space. So, Kate, if we're talking about obstacles and things that sort of really prevent the sort of same, I guess, adoption that we've seen in other areas like e-commerce and commerce in general, and the hyper-personalization of things and all the opportunities that we can talk about in terms of regulation and cost reduction and everything in between. Talk to us about the obstacles that we need to clear to allow us to, you know, to keep moving further forward, in your opinion.
Yeah, I'll provide my perspective from an operations perspective.
Sure.
When I think about what's going on in the industry right now, in particular for securities, the SEC last year said that institutions needed to move from T+2 settlement to T+1 settlement. And so that causes enormous obstacles, maybe not so much for the very large institutions, but there are many institutions that aren't as savvy and digitized as the larger ones. So that rule goes into effect May 28th of next year. And there's a huge push across the industry to really identify what the processes are from execution to confirmation, affirmation, settlement, and then everything that happens in between. Securities lending is a big one. FX funding is also really important. So one of the obstacles from an ops perspective is that, one, many organizations don't have robust digital strategies to really understand where all of their data sits and how it all works together, so that when this compressed settlement cycle takes place, they can act more quickly. And so there's a lot that's being done there, and there are many vendors, obviously, who are introducing solutions to help access fintech, aggregating data, various aspects of it. Where we see the biggest problem, communication, is There's 3 problem statements that I talk about very often. One of them is swivel chair syndrome. So the fact that these institutions are working in many different systems and they are taking data from one place and putting it into another place. So manually keying information is a huge problem, especially when it relates to communication external to an organization. So imagine you have an operations analyst who's exhausted because he's working so hard, as most of them do, and he takes a file and he sends it to the wrong place. That's a huge data breach. So that's a problem. So we're working with them, and there are many institutions working together to see how we can connect each other and become more interoperable. So communication, from our perspective, becomes easier. Another problem we see is that there's an overabundance of data in emails, and it's all unstructured. So how do you structure that data and provide information to clients seamlessly and quickly without having humans needing to get involved? So you can build bots within an encrypted platform like Symphony to allow for a customer to ask a question and have a self-service capability that will pull information back to them at their fingertips, and then have that bot be smart enough to know that it hasn't figured out what it needed to provide to the customer, and then it brings a human into the platform. It brings a human into the platform through the third obstacle, which is, how do I know who the right person is? Well, you know who the right person is by digitizing your directory and actually creating reference data for people, which is another thing Symphony's doing. I said earlier, we have 600,000 users on our platform across 1,000 institutions. We've worked with SIFMA and others to create an initiative whereby we have created an ops directory for the industry that's really going to help, eliminate one of those obstacles, which is, how do I get a response quick enough and go to the right place to get it?
I think there's a really interesting piece there about the fact that I think there's been a move over the last couple of years to partnership. Interoperability has been game-changing, and you're seeing a world where people are able to work together. And there's examples of that in this room, in businesses that I've seen, and that sort of creates the fact that whilst there's obstacles, there's also the ability to put minds together to create bridges over those obstacles as well. Kartik, I want to speak to you about this as well, because I think it's really fascinating of a business at your sort of age of company, et cetera, and how that gets adopted, which I think is also an obstacle within the sector. That you've got great minds coming up with problems, and then there's barriers to entry for those sort of businesses at various different stages. So talk to us about obstacles from a startup still capacity.
Yeah, I think by nature of a startup, where the biggest obstacle is that you're trying to disrupt something that's already working for someone, and you have no credibility to do it. You have no background. You need less than 5 people, and no branding associated to it. Right.
So where do I sign?
So exactly, and then you have to come over the top and tell them, you know what, this is actually why you're doing this wrong. This is how we can help you save money or actually help you do it faster. The derivative of that same obstacle, though, is that when you're building a software company that requires you to get access to your customers' data, which you're telling them is very important, but you're also telling them that they're mishandling it. Those 2 obstacles actually if you can solve that function, is what's going to allow you to actually move faster inside of a customer landscape and actually get multiple stakeholders together to get their data in a place where you can drive enough insights from it and actually get your analytical product in the right place, right? So if you're almost saying the right words to multiple stakeholders, enabling them to feel like the pain point is frankly worth than how much that institution is paying for toilet paper a month, right? And these types of data points is what's going to get them to be like, all right, you know what, this data is not being utilized correctly. This software has a solution, as a vertical pinpoint solution that's going to help me solve it. And then it's like a procurement problem, right? Which is, again, as a software company, a small software company, is like, how do you get...
That's another nightmare.
Right. And then you're like, all right, so you have the stakeholders ready, you have the budget assigned, you have a problem identified. Now let's wait 12 months and get paperwork signed, right? And then it's like, all right, how do you solve procurement fast enough? And I think the more you can drum up the urgency earlier and earlier...
with multiple stakeholders.
It's and remove those obstacles over and over and over again. Then you can actually, shorten that, 12-month sales cycle as a small startup to actually, potentially 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
When we closed our first bank, it took us 18 months to do so.
It's
and
incredible,
that was,
isn't it?
and that was, you know,
And that's short.
Yeah,
Well, that's actually
right,
quite-
exactly. So these things, definitely, you know, with a mindset of waiting for how to get enterprise software inside the door. By nature, like I said, you're disrupting something that's already working.
Yeah.
And just to build on, which I agree 100%, you hit on a very key thing. There's multiple stakeholders. So getting them on the same page is always a challenge, which is by far the biggest thing. Defining the value of the data when you're innovating data is very, very hard. And ultimately, the biggest one, and I can say this with this in this room, technologists have ego. So when you're coming at an innovative idea, they're gonna go, what are they gonna say? I could build it myself. It's like time and time again. So when I see these very, very innovative products, that is the biggest challenges. So you have multiple products. One person could love it. Next stakeholder, that's okay. Third stakeholder, I can build it myself. And then that's coupled with your legal, your risk, and your compliance folks saying, I don't want anybody touching the data. And that's so it's a spiral, right? And I know your firm's overcoming it, but I can empathize greatly because I see
yeah.
leftwards and rightwards.
And speaking of actually just piggybacking off that last point around, you know, technologists that can think they can, instead of large organizations, build that solution themselves. When we're going through a transition right now, which is a lot of CDOs are going through a set of conversations with their leadership that they actually need to be involved in analytics as well, right? They need to be involved in data science as well. And all of us in this room are constantly around leaders that are in the data science space or the data office space. And what we're seeing is when we've talked to all of the banks and their AI teams so far and their data teams, the biggest thing that we've learned is how far they are from the business, right? And an obstacle in that case is, look, we got an absolutely sharp and talented team in all of these banks that are investing in AI and investing in how data should be used. But then if you talk to the business and ask them how much have they actually leveraged their own internal AI tools in that bank, there's a massive gap in terms of communication, right? So when you hear from a senior technologist in a bank that says, I could code the list myself, the second question I always ask is, well, who's your customer, right? Who's your internal customer? And then they're like, you know, we're gonna build it. We're gonna talk to our own teams and departments, and it's not as well solidified. And so what we thought was like, why don't we come from the business unit, try to break the obstacle down right off the bat there, and then have the business unit say that why don't we team up with their AI team? Why don't we team up with their data team? And that way the business unit is already ready for the solution, and then the AI team, who's a technologist, feel like they can do this themselves. It excites them as well that they were able to actually contribute more to the business. Instead of it just being a research project for the quarter. So we've maneuvered a lot of those around those obstacles as well. But to your point, you know, you press a button there,
Intentionally so.
which is dealing with those technologies.
Yeah, and you hit on a point early in the conversation where there was a historical push for data to be all centralized. Now it's actually being decentralized with security and so on and so forth. So when I see all of these larger implementations, I like the idea that you sparse out the data necessary for the analytics, and then you keep the core data separate. That's a new idea to people to get their heads around. So you only take it to you only need to know basis, and it starts driving the thing. Say, you want to have access to everything, you'll have access to this, see how it works. And the other thing that I see is a lot of the analytics ahead, you don't need historicals, right? Especially with AI, you can do projecting very easily. So you don't need to do a huge data dump, right? You really only need a very, very finite amount of data to actually start seeing some results from analytics. And that's a very important thing. As a guy, look, I come from a trading background. Traders, you know, going back 20 years, why? I never understood that. Like, it's stupid. If the data points represent, like, so it's the same kind of thing when you're looking at customer data and all of these things. It's just, you got to start looking at that, and then you make projections, see how accurate the projections are, and then the data analytics work, then you can actually start implementing it. People start with this scale, you should start with this scale. And it's a big failure on most technologists that I see.
That sort of moves into the whole thing about, you know, what to get right, which in my mind is, and you highlighted this at the very start, this is analysis paralysis. So when we're talking about the size and scale of data, and we're talking about, you know, how much, where people just can start with all of this, that actually it just ends up in inertia as opposed to anything else. And Kevin, I know you've been...
Yeah, again, it's a theme that I have over and over again, that, you know, you want to make the perfect decision based on the perfect data, but we're all in business, it doesn't exist. So you go back to the history, like I'm a very avid person on history. What did people do to build these monster companies in the first place? They took limited data and they made decisions. So why can't we do the same thing actually with AI and with these tools to actually take that limited data and actually make more reasonable decisions? That's a key point, right? And there's no need to record, well, that light bulb is white, that one's yellowish white. Doesn't matter, right? So what you really have to focus on is the scope of what you're recording over and over again. Even this conversation, you're going to only take probably 5 to 10 points out of all of it. Those are the most important ones. That's how your brain works. Very reasonable approach. It's just biology. So why wouldn't you build your data sets and all of your analytics the same way? That's the whole thing. I always laugh when people say, I record everything. I mean, I don't get it. I really don't understand why you would do that. It's a waste of money. It's clumsy. It's security problems, all of these various other things. So really what you're starting to see is, and I'll get into one of the future questions, is people are just, on the technology side, just building massive amounts of places to build it because the cloud's unlimited. It's quite cheap. Just throw a bunch of data in there. Well, why did you throw the data in there? We're going to use it
to prove something.
to prove something,
right? Yeah.
And we have terabytes and we have tons and tons of data. So I have the answer though, with my little data set, and try to beat me. And that's really, if you get it back, I really do believe in trading. Like traders, they take a finite amount of data and they make a decision, right? Try to beat the market. Well, why can't you just do the same exact thing with the data and over again? And this is where I think the trends in the future will be starting to realize that you can't keep every single data point. You just can't. It's impossible. It's impossible, and it's just getting more and more. I was on a panel some time ago, and they're saying the way we're going, there'll be data centers on every block. But it's true. Think about it. And there's fascinating stuff going on with data storage, going to organic mechanisms and all that kind of stuff, because you literally don't have enough room. So the biggest thing that's expanding in commercial real estate right now is data centers. So it's true, right? And you always hear about commercial real estate is going down and such, which it is for retail, but data centers are going up like skyrockets. What is all that data working with? So
I think we've all got a new side hustle.
I'm not saying side hustle. I'm just saying this is the way. Like everyone thinks the cloud is infinite, so you should just throw a bunch of junk in there. It's it's like your whole closet. How much stuff do you really need to put in there? And then you open it up and it falls down on you. Like you keep it organized and it works out much better.
Okay, talk about getting things right and looking at those things. You prioritize some of the areas that you guys are doing. But if you're thinking, about getting that engine in position, what do you think people really have to focus in on to get right?
Yeah, from a front office perspective, I would highlight that messaging and ensuring that your teams are all compliant is very important. From an operations perspective, I would say the most important thing is, what is your communication strategy? And what I mean when I say that is, firms have done an enormous amount of work to support email to task management because that is the primary way people communicate. But there are many other pockets of communication that take place, whether you're in a proprietary tool and you're working on exceptions, or you're in a vendor tool and you're working on exceptions. You need to be able to aggregate all of those communications so your teams aren't in a bunch of different systems communicating with each other. I would say that's the biggest thing. And then on top of that, and we can talk about that more in the future state, but then being able to analyze that data, all of that communication data, and find sentiments, find where, if you're a large broker-dealer is getting 500,000 emails on a monthly basis, you need to be able to analyze that data and figure out what the repetitive questions or information that's being shared, and you need to create self-service capabilities by leveraging bots in an encrypted way.
Yeah, absolutely. Kartik, I'll throw the same sort of thing over to you with regards to, what if you walk in your customer's shoes, what do you think they need to get right? What do they absolutely need to get right?
I think you need to minimize the number of problems that they think they really have, and focus. Because whenever I speak to our customers or I speak to our prospects, I think they're leaning a little bit more towards how they want to join a bandwagon of a buzzword that is being thrown around versus really prioritizing what's really a problem and then meticulously executing towards it.
Yeah.
So Kevin said it earlier. It's shortening the number of priorities that you really think you have, and then that's always been, I think, a problem.
Working the upside
Yeah.
for it. I think the problem when you've got a group that are as knowledgeable as you three is I've done a horrible job at basically keeping to time. So I'm going to sort of move pretty quickly into the future now, because I feel like we should probably have had 2 hours of talking about this. And I know there's a group out here who are going to be throwing questions at you left, right, and centre as well. So if we are moving now to the future of data, and it sort of ties into this process of what to get right. Talk to me about 2024 and what you think some of the trends are going to be. Kevin, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, so I think data storage and data management will get cheaper and cheaper, right? I have no doubt about that. I think that's the way it's going. I think people are going to still, to Kartik's point, going to still use buzzwords to come out that you need to use data. I remind you of history. People have made business decisions for decades without a lot of data, and they've made them right. What I do focus on is the power to validate. Right? You can get a validation of something very quickly. And that's really what I love about AI. You can have a belief on what the market's doing, what your clients are doing, you can validate it very quickly. So that I think they're going to move more into a validation. So because the cost is going to be so cheap, I think there is going to be more and more of these younger firms out there that are coming up with data analytics to scrape data together. You usually saw it with Twitter or now X. They started charging because a lot of firms were just scraping stuff off of them. Right, and they started charging, so that a lot of firms went out of business and such. But you're going to see that more and more. People are just coming together and coming up with ideas based on data, right? And you really can build off so many different things with data. It's not just your TV shows. It's not that. It should make your life better, right? So that's my first thing is validation, keeping it simple, right? Is the thing, and then we'll go into the bigger one is the ethical questions, right? So as a large firm, that's the biggest challenge to me out of all of this stuff. Ethically, what can you do? Right, and I think that's going to be very much a collab together. And unfortunately, data mining and getting analytics gets collabed together with AI, and AI gets collabed together with the Terminator, and then the end of the world. So all these things.
Netflix algorithm.
Exactly. And if you make it, and I'm imagining most of you are data analytic folk. Data analytics and AI take a large data set and consider multiple probabilities. Right? And they consider multiple ideas that your human brain can't do. Your human brain can only do X. This does X, Y, and Z, right? So on and so forth. That's all it does, right? So it makes probability decisions. Based on the probability, this is the best course of action. That's how you have to focus it over and over again. So to build it into business, you're getting based on the probability, this is the best example based on the data. Now, you always hear that good data in, good data. I'll let the media figure all of that nonsense out. You should automatically have good data. So, again, we can lie to ourselves just as easy as data can, right? That's, again, I separate the media often from this thing, but really what you're doing is you're validating cheaply, right? That's the big thing. And you now need to do it ethically. I think those are the trends that I see.
Kartik, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think not to be cliche, but I think the historically we've always said data is becoming the new oil. In my personal opinion, it's also now that machines are requiring less oil, right? And if you're building more and more machines inside of a business, if you think about how data is now being stored into models and how it's being stored into algorithms, and algorithms are being put together as a programming language to actually build a workflow together, the way the future is going is that less data is required to actually, to make a decision. But to make a machine go faster, you're putting more algorithms together. You're putting more software together, and you're creating a workflow that says, we had a number of algorithms that were trained on this data set that understand the customer behavior for X, Y, Z types of pattern. Let's take only those algorithms, put an API on top of those, and have a workflow that says, I'm going to ask this question to this model, this question to this model, and I'm going to make a workflow that says, this is the end outcome that I want. And it's going to decrease the time it required now for data scraping, data normalization, data engineering, putting the data in the right place. And where we're going now, if you look at the top, kind of software companies, they built a beautiful API, a beautiful algorithm over a massive amount of data set. And if you think about how these AI agents are answering our questions, they're just communicating to those APIs, right? And if you think about all this, where this is going to be packaged together and going, as a software provider myself, I'm actually taking a step back and I'm like, I'm going to let this wave continue going the way it's going. I'm not going to pivot. I'm not going to change the way our direction is going, but I'm going to try to catch them at at where I think the next 2 years is going to be, which is let's minimize our effort on we need this net new data set, but now we need this net new API that's that has a model that can make an inference fast enough that can help answer some business decisions for us. And that's why don't we build a really good wrapper or beautiful UI on top of that makes data access much faster. So that's where I think it's going. It's machines requiring less oil to even move faster.
Yeah. It's all about the hybrid motor now, isn't it?
Yeah. You're gonna buy an electric vehicle.
There we go. Yeah. There's all sorts of analogies we can work on here, isn't there? Kate, finish us off.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So just to round out what we've been talking about, Symphony started as a collaboration platform and was chat for the financial services industry. But the sign of the times is we've been preparing for the future over the last 3 years by doing 3 significant acquisitions. One was to purchase a software that allows you to create an organizational map and then exchange that with the industry. So it's digitizing a directory and creating people reference data. And that's very valuable, especially when you talk about moving faster. In addition to that, we bought a voice company. So think Trader Voice, but in the cloud. So pandemic hits, you can't take your turret home. If your telephone's in the cloud, you can leverage it that way. So that's a very big deal. And we're seeing a huge trend, especially with ops people. And they're a little scared of it in London, but they're so excited about it in the United States, is to be in a chat room and to be able to hit a button and ping through a hoop all of those people that are in that room to them instantly. And that's been patented, and that's a really big deal. And I would say the third, we bought an analytics company. Think about all these capabilities and think about voice in particular that's transcribed and monitored, and be able to leverage that data from a business intelligence perspective and find insights to improve your processes and also to improve, obviously, your ROI as an organization.
Loved your sort of phraseology the other day when we were talking about this. The telephone's back, right?
The telephone's back. Although Brad Levy, our CEO, would say, stop calling it a telephone, it is voice. And there's 3 pieces. There's Trader Voice, there's instant voice, and there's mobile voice. So
Voice is back.
voice is back.
So they always say, don't they, that the time flies when you're talking great stuff about data. So we've done that. So we're going to move into a speed round now. We're going to have to do this pretty quickly.